Hey everyone, back again with another Supra video. So we're going to work on the intercooler tubing today. And you can see that on the left hand side here, I have four 3-inch 90-degree bends. On the right hand side, I have four 4-inch 90-degree bends. And these will end up getting cut and transformed into the intercooler tubes. So the cold side, you can see the space we're dealt there. And the hot side, the space that we are dealt here. So the hot side is going to be a little bit more complicated than the cold side just due to the spatial constraint that I'm dealt with it, but I think we should be able to do it without much issue. So I'm going to start with the hot side, as I like to work on the most difficult thing first, so the less difficult one seems that much easier. And the one thing I have to keep in mind, or the one point of contention with this, will be the width of the radiator. Now, the radiator needs to be a minimum of 16 inches wide as far as the core width goes, or the core dimensions go, in order to fit the electric fan that I will be running. So this is a Spall brushless fan. It puts out something ridiculous like 2300 CFM or something along those lines. So that should be more than enough to keep this thing cool. But as you see, it does have a dimension to it that I need to keep in mind as I'm building these intercooler tubes. So with that in mind, and also keeping in mind that I will need to have fittings, or I guess they'd be ORB female weld bosses that will allow number 16 radiator hoses, there's a few things to consider as I'm building these intercooler tubes. So I'll keep those dimensions in mind, and other than that, I think we can go ahead and start cutting and fitting these tubes up. After a significant amount of off-camera grinding and fitting, we have a hot side intercooler tube. It was extremely cumbersome to make, but it's done. Let's take a look at it. So that is what, well, get a better angle. That is what we ended up with. So what I ended up having to do, similar to what I did on the downpipe, taking a long radius bend, cutting sections out of the center to shrink the centerline radius in, I had to do that with almost every single bend that was involved with this charge pipe. So it snakes around, loops up into the compressor cover. Looks cool, everything fits well, and it's still loose, so it doesn't bind up, meaning that there's not really any stress put on those clamps, so that's good. Looking at it through the front, you can see the tube snaking around there. Plenty of room to the compressor cover. I think it looks pretty cool. So it's late now. You can see outside, it's dark, and I'm going to get out of here before we get going on that cold side tube. So we'll reconvene in a little bit, get that knocked out, and then the intercooler tubes will be done. So I'll see you guys then. And we are back to work more on the Supra's intercooler tubing. Now, I sat and thought a little bit about how this hot side tube came out, and I'm really not that happy with it. You can see that with the grinding I had to do, the bends on the outside of them are a little bit peaky, and I don't think it looks quite as good as it could. So I'll more than likely end up redoing that tube, but that will be a task for a later date. Today, we are going to build the cold side tube. And like I said before, we have to keep in mind that we need all of this real estate here for the radiator to sit. So this tube will have to come out relatively straight, snake around the mount for the dry sump tank, and then make its way up into our Wiggins flange there. So I have my bends on the ground, and let's go ahead and get started. And with that, we now have the intercooler tubing completed. So you saw in that little montage that I just did, both the hot and the cold side, and everything came out nicely. Now you can see the brushed finish that I put on all of these tubes, and I'm probably going to end up having them powder coated, but I at least wanted to do that for the time being so I could see how the brush looks and give me the ability to have multiple options for what I want to do with the surface finish. So that's about it for the intercooler tubes. This one, the cold side tube, was much easier than the hot side tube was, as I figured it would be. But while we are in the midst of this video, why don't we check out a couple of other things that I did off camera. So the first thing that I did was fix the gaping hole that was in the rear of the car from where I cut the spare tire wall out from when I was planning on putting the radiator in the rear of the car. So let me pop the hatch because we can get a better view that way. So don't judge my seam seal work too harshly. It's just there to seal the welds up and to seal the pieces together. It's going to get covered in carpet, not a big deal, but let's take a look. So I have a nice piece, all solid in there, and I have this little access port right here with 4 Zeus's that if we pop it loose, pull that out of the way, then we have access to the filler neck, or the fill port rather. So rather than run the fill port all the way up to factory location and looking more at the fuel cell as I was building it, it wouldn't have worked well for me to do it that way. So this is what I opted to do instead. So nice and easy, put the cap back down in its home, pop it shut, and then this panel sits right over top and gets clipped in like you saw with these 4 Zeus fasteners. So a little bit hard to do. There's a set order the way you have to do it. I'm not going to screw with it now. So beyond that, the exhaust is no longer held up with zip ties. It's amazing, right? And if we look up underneath of it, I built this hanger. I wonder if I can get a better view from this side. Maybe, I'm not sure. Let's see if I can shove this up in here without having it blur horribly. But if you guys can see, I have a nice triangulated exhaust hanger that keeps the exhaust right where it needs to be. So it came out pretty nicely. And the one point of contention where Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. Right here on the side of my bracket here to hold the bumper in place, if it wiggles hard enough, it will make contact there. So what I'll likely do is take an angled cut out of the bracket and all will be well there. The bracket is what I had made for the rear mount radiator setup that had already had provisions in it for the bumper to hold the bumper skin up. So I figured rather than build another one, I would just utilize that. And it leaves the perfect amount of clearance to my fitting here, and that will allow for a nice routing of... So that's about it for things that have been done off camera. Shut this. Next order of business will be to build the radiator for the car. And I'm in talks with Bell right now to get the correct size core that will fit up here and that will allow me to build the end tanks the way that they need to be built for all this to work harmoniously. So let's take a look at our clearance again, or our space that we have allotted for it. And like we said before, to come as far over towards the cold side tube as possible, and then likely as far over towards the hot side tube as possible. So this area right in here is what has been left over to fit the radiator in place, and that will be its new home. So beyond that, I think I figured out a way to add a third mounting point to the intercooler to make sure that that's as rigid as it can possibly be and not end up ripping these new intercooler tubes apart. What I'll likely do there is take and make a simple U-bar that I will try to keep away from the actual fin or bar and plate portion of the intercooler, and that will come to a centralized threaded boss on the top of the intercooler, and that will keep it nice and solid, 3 points of contact. Everything's triangulated and everything will be good there. But those will all be things that will happen in upcoming videos. So that's about it for this video. As usual, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.